In a forgotten town ruled by superstition, innocent Maggie Fremont found herself on the brink, condemned to be burned for witchcraft. Reverend Welton, stoking the crowd's fanaticism, sought to cleanse the town of sin, but only multiplied injustice and fear. However, fate had a shocking twist. Quiet farmer Elai Holloway, seeing not a curse but a person in Maggie, stood against the entire town to claim her as his wife. Discover how an act of true kindness and resolve conquered ignorance, and why justice ultimately triumphed over the flames of prejudice. When Maggie Fremont stepped out onto the porch with a bucket, the church bells were already ringing for the third time. They weren't ringing for a funeral or for prayer. It was an ancient signal in this God-forsaken town. Everyone gather. Children playing in the dusty road immediately ran to their mothers. Men dropped their tools and women hurriedly picked up laundry baskets. Everyone headed for the main square, to where Reverend Welton was preparing to tell the residents who would now be blamed for the town's misfortunes. But Maggie remained on the porch. She watched as shutters closed one by one, as if the houses were ashamed of her presence. She didn't even try to go. She knew someone else would speak for her, as always. Reverend Welton, shouting from a raised platform, "This year, drought. 5 infants died. A cow dropped dead right in the pasture. These are not accidents, these are signs. Signs that she is here, among us." The crowd, as if on cue, turned to her house, to the Fremont family home, where for 11 years lived the one whose birth the town considered a sin. The daughter of Linda Fremont, a widow who died the same night Maggie was born. No one knew who her father was. Rumors circulated: an uninvited man who came from the East, a traveling false preacher, a dark spirit in a human body. In the Old West, neither mystery nor silence was forgiven, and Maggie was both. She grew up as if under a glass dome. She was avoided, but not driven away. Until this summer. First, old Mrs. Harper died, drowning in a barrel of rainwater, though she was sober. Then pigs began to be born with cross-shaped spots. And then blacksmith John Pearson found a dead bird in his yard, with its wings spread and a feather in its eye. For people raised in fear of witches, this was more than enough. Reverend Welton, even preaching, "She's not just a girl. She is a child of darkness. Don't you see? Don't you feel it? Every summer she grows older. The troubles become worse. This summer she became a woman, and the river dried up." The crowd was silent. Then someone yelled, "Townspeople, OS. Burn her. Townspeople, OS. Cleanse the earth of the curse." Maggie listened from the window. She didn't cry. She had long forgotten how. But inside everything burned, not from fear but from powerlessness. She did nothing. She just lived. She just stayed silent. When footsteps sounded on the porch that night, she was already dressed. It wasn't the sheriff or the judge who came for her. It was the women. The ones who once brought her milk but stopped. The ones who used to nod shyly at her, but now looked her in the eye and said, "Woman, tummy krensu. You'll come with us. It's for the good of all. We mean no harm, but you're not like us. Forgive us." They led her through the sleeping streets, away from the houses, to the old grain elevator where corn used to be dried. Now it was a storage place for firewood and barrels of kerosene. Beyond this building began a ravine where vagrants usually slept. Men with torches were already standing there. The next day, the whole town knew, in 3 nights at the full moon, the girl would be burned. Not just burned, a cleansing ritual would be performed. A ceremony, as they called it, with a sermon, with a wreath on her head, with ropes for hands, with a bonfire lit under a wooden platform, with stakes driven into the ground. Reverend Welton, repeating like a mantra, "We are not killing, we are cleansing. This is not revenge, this is protection from darkness." Among this crowd, one man said nothing. He stood at the end of the street, not looking up. This was Elai Holloway. Few ever noticed him. He lived on a farm beyond the hill, came to town only for mail, and didn't engage in conversations. But he knew Maggie, quietly knew her. He had seen her once feed an injured dog, seen her stand in the rain and not seek shelter, how she once sat by his barn and drew a bird on the wall with a piece of charcoal, a bird that never flies away. And now he stood, watched, and understood that the town was ready to burn a living person for a myth. And for 3 nights the town began to prepare. The bonfire was built by teenagers under the supervision of their parents. A stage was set up. A wreath of dry grass was twisted. Someone found a white dress. Someone made a sign, "Bride of the Devil," to hang around her neck. And she, Maggie, was silent. For the first time in 17 years, no one called her by name. Only she, or the girl, or the witch. And no one, it seemed, knew that all this time in the saddle, through the hills in a dust storm, someone was riding. Not from fear, but from fury. His name was Elai. He wasn't good with words, but he knew how to remember pain. And he was going to call her what no one in this town dared: his own. On the second day of preparations, a strange sense of celebration already hung over the town. The hammering, the smell of wood, the sound of boys chasing an old wheel with a stick, and the smell of dinner cooking in the houses. Everything seemed to forget why a stage was actually being built in the town square. And on the hill across the river, where the grass dried earlier than elsewhere, a horse stood alone. A harness hung around its neck, askew, as if put on in haste. Its owner, Elai Holloway, hadn't slept since that night. He wasn't a hero. He didn't rescue girls in white. He was a farmer, solitary, too quiet to argue and too observant not to see. But now his silence had become a lump in his throat. He knew Maggie was locked in the old barn behind the church. The old barn, once belonging to the King family, was now a place where sacks of grain and a subdued girl were kept, like an object. No one guarded her, not because they weren't afraid she'd escape, but because they believed, where would she go? She's cursed. That night, when the moon had already risen above the old gates, Elai, without a word to anyone, saddled his horse. He rode without a lantern. Only the wind and his own thoughts were his companions. When he approached the barn, the doors were secured only by an iron latch. No chains, no locks. He slowly opened the door, and inside in the dim light, he saw her. Maggie sat on the floor, her hands tied with rope. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt. Her hair was matted. Her eyes, those same eyes he had once seen through the rain, now empty, and yet vigilant. She wasn't surprised when she saw him. "Maggie," quietly, "why did you come?" Elai, just as quietly, "Because you're human, not a mark, not a legend, not a brand." She was silent, and then she said, "Maggie, tomorrow they'll be singing, shouting, rejoicing. It's tradition." Elai, "It's not tradition, it's fear disguised as faith." He sat down beside her, untied her hands. She didn't move. "Maggie, I can't leave. They have eyes everywhere." Well, we won't leave. We will stand before them in the morning, and I will tell them who you are and who you will be now." She turned to him. "Maggie, who?" Elai, looking directly into her face. "My wife." In the morning, everything was ready. The square was covered with hay. The bonfire was neatly stacked, a pyramid topped by a platform to which the bride of the devil was to be tied. The white dress hung on a rope. The crowd gathered early. Old men carried out benches. Children sat on fences. Women brought pies and honey, as if it were a harvest festival, not about a living human being. When Welton came out in a long black coat, everyone fell silent. "Reverend Welton, brothers and sisters, this day will be remembered as a day of cleansing. We have gathered courage. We will not allow darkness to rule our land. Today we will give back what was taken and open the way for light." But before he could finish, Elai appeared in the square. He walked, holding Maggie by the hand, not by force, not by rope, simply by the hand, like a man leads someone he cherishes. The crowd froze. Welton stammered, "Reverend Welton, who let her go?" Elai, "I did, because she is free, and because from this moment she is my wife." Townspeople, OS. "That's blasphemy! He's bewitched!" Elai, "Number, I am just a man, and I don't want to live among beasts." Welton stepped forward. His eyes were full of malice. Reverend Welton, you don't understand what you're doing. This marriage, it's sacrilege. She is a child without a father, born at midnight. Her mother died at her birth. Her whole life is an omen. Elai, calmly, "And you are a man who has decided that God only speaks to him." The crowd was silent, because for the first time in many years, someone had said what many were afraid even to think. Maggie stood. She didn't cry, but now there was something akin to life in her eyes. Yes, Elai, you want to burn her because you're scared. But if you raise a hand to her, you'll have to go through me. And if anyone else thinks of doing the same, let them know. She now has a name, and it is Holloway. He took a ring from his finger, offered it to her. Elai, I am not rich, I am not clever, but if you agree, you will never be alone again. She took the ring. Maggie, Hinachili, then let them see that I am not cursed, but simply one who was unprotected for too long. Silence reigned among the crowd. Someone quietly walked away. Someone lowered their eyes. Someone slowly, very slowly, began to dismantle the bonfire. And Welton stood, alone, and for the first time no one was listening to him. The wedding didn't happen to the sound of an organ or within church walls, not even with a blessing. It happened under a clear morning sky, on a wooden bench by the barn wall, where it smelled of hay, dust, and freedom. Elai spoke simple words that required no witnesses, only mutual consent. Maggie, still with bruises on her wrist, nodded, without a smile but with a direct gaze. She finally looked the world in the face instead of hiding from it. All of this would have been a fairy tale, if not for the fear that lived in people more strongly than common sense. If not for Welton, he didn't leave, he didn't give up, he simply retreated. For a few days. That same evening, Deacon John Talbot came to Elai's house, a small, hunched man with eyes like a hungry fox. He knocked on the door, and without waiting for an answer, entered. John Talbot. Elai, do you think that this will end? This is just the beginning. Welton is preparing a hearing, a church trial. He wants you to appear before the congregation. Elai didn't look up. He just said, Elai, I am not a parishioner. I am a man. I took a woman as my wife, not a legend. John Talbot. Then pray they don't remind her of what they thought she was. They haven't forgotten. They're just waiting. 3 days passed. Elai and Maggie didn't appear in town. He worked the land as before. She learned to keep house, sew, brew coffee. Sometimes she looked out the window, and there was something inexpressible on her face. Not fear, vigilance. And then an old man came to the house, silent, with a horse whose hoof was bandaged with a rag. He asked for water. Maggie poured it from the well. You're the one, aren't you? She didn't answer. Oh, well, man, you know my wife was also called a witch once, because she healed with herbs, because she didn't go to church, because she gave birth to a child who died that same night. We left, started over. She lived for 20 more years, and she never regretted turning away from them. And I never regretted being by her side. He left quietly, and in Maggie's chest it felt as if something had warmed. On the 4th day, as storm clouds gathered over the village, 3 men came out onto the porch. Welton, Talbot, and another, Sheriff Brody. Reverend Welton. Elai Holloway, by the will of the parish, you are required to appear before the assembly. You are accused of desecrating the church covenant, participating in a ritual against the faith, and in a marriage that violates divine law. Elai. Divine law, have you read the scriptures or only the chapters that are convenient for you? Reverend Welton, I give you a choice. Either you bring her to the assembly on Sunday to repent, or we will declare your marriage invalid, and then she will be banished. Elai was silent. Maggie stepped out from behind him. Maggie, we will come, but not to repent, but for you to hear us. Sunday arrived. The church was full. People sat in the aisles, stood by the windows, listening, holding their breath. Welton stood at the altar. Reverend Welton, today we will remember what cleansing means, what it means to keep faith in an hour of doubt. We must decide, who are we, the flock of the Lord, or a crowd following its weaknesses? And at that moment, the doors opened. Elai and Maggie entered. She, in a simple blue dress, her hair neatly tied back, her hands not trembling. He, in his father's old jacket, and not with a sword, but with a ring on his finger. Reverend Welton, I'm listening. What do you want to say in your defense? Elai looked at the crowd, at familiar faces, those whose fences he had once fixed, brought firewood to, healed horses, people he had helped, and who now sat in silence. Elai. I am not defending myself. I married, not a witch, not a fear, but a woman whom you rejected because it was easier for you to accuse her than to understand. He took a step forward. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to say you are not gods. Neither you, Welton, nor you, Talbot. None of you know what is in a person's heart. Woman, O.S. She's cursed. My cow died when she walked by. OLD man, O.S. Number my granddaughter was dying. Maggie gave her a brew, and she got up. A whisper went through the hall. Townspeople, O.S. She was born at midnight. Townspeople, O.S. I was too, and what now? The crowd began to divide. Someone stood up. Someone left the hall. And someone, for the first time, looked at Welton with doubt. Elai, you're losing control. Reverend Welton, with fury, I'm losing faith, but not my own, yours. And then Maggie said, Maggie, if you consider me evil, burn me. But let it be in front of everyone, in front of your children, your wives. Let them see what you do to those who simply don't fit into your fear. Silence, not a single person stood up. Not a single one came forward. And then someone slowly applauded. The old man with a bandaged hand. Then another and another. And now the whole church stood, but not beside Welton, but opposite him. He was alone against a world that had finally begun to think for itself. When the applause died down, a silence fell in the church. A silence that held neither fear nor worship. Only realization. Welton stood at the altar like a man who had lost control not of the people, but of himself. He looked around and, for the first time in his life, saw not a single gaze filled with faith in him. Elai took Maggie's hand and led her towards the exit. They walked past the old men, women, teenagers. No one looked away. No one took a step back. People parted with respect. Welton didn't shout after them. He didn't rush them. He understood. The crowd he had fed with fear was satiated. They rode home in silence. The horse walked unhurriedly, and the wind ruffled Maggie's hair. In the distance, the ravine roared, smelling of thunder and something new, as if something had been freed from the old world. Chiaweo Lae. Quietly. Are you scared? Maggie. Surieridirum. Number I've never lived like this before. Elae. And you'll never hide again. She nodded. But this was not the end. That same night, 2 men came to the house. Talbot and Sheriff Brody. But not with accusations this time. Sheriff Brody. I filed a report on Welton for incitement, abuse of power, and false accusations. There will be a county-level investigation. It will take time. John Talbot, adding, and he probably won't be jailed, but his power, it's over. Sheriff Brody, continuing, we came to say that the town isn't your enemy, Elai, and neither is she. Times are changing, slowly, but changing. Elai didn't reply, he just nodded. Then he said, Elai, if you truly care, help rebuild the bridge over the Western Creek. Spring will be wild. And they laughed. A week later on Sunday, the church doors were open, but Welton was not there. In his place stood a new pastor, a woman, gray-haired and with a direct gaze. She spoke of forgiveness, but not of submission, of faith, but not of fear. The people listened, and in the front row sat Maggie and Elai. She held his hand, and on her lips was a faint but genuine smile. Not a defiance, not a mask, the smile of life. Several months passed. Spring came with heavy rains, the land blossomed. Maggie learned to write. Elai built a new barn, and the old one now housed neighbors when something needed to be decided. He was no longer the quiet farmer. He became one who listens, but doesn't stay silent when it's time to speak. And one evening at sunset, a woman in black came up onto the porch. The very same one who was the first to shout in the church, "She's cursed!" Woman, I'm ashamed. I was foolish and evil. Take this fabric from me. I can sew. Maybe you'll make yourself a dress. Maggie took the fabric. She didn't smile, but she nodded. Maggie, thank you. Go in peace. Welton. He left. Rumors said he settled somewhere in the mountains. Alone. No one drove him out, but he understood. The fear he had wielded no longer bore fruit. When summer arrived, children began to come to the Holloway's farm, first from neighboring settlements, then from farther away. Runaways, lost ones, outcasts. Maggie met them with water and bread. She didn't ask who their parents were. Only one thing, did they want to stay? They stayed. A year later, Elai and Maggie had a farm full of voices. Laughter, crying, conversations, life. Girl 7 with braids and freckles. Were you really a witch? Maggie smiled. Maggie is Shorinus. Sometimes when I needed to protect myself, but mostly just a person, GIRL. Pointing to Elai, And him? Maggie Fremont. He's the one who wasn't afraid of a witch, which means he's the bravest man in this land. Eli came over and put his arm around her shoulders. Elai, Dior, whispering, "It's all behind us, Maggie. Number, it's all just beginning." And behind them the garden filled with light. They called her unclean, cursed, demonic. But it turned out she was simply not who they expected. Yet next to the one who didn't seek an ideal wife, but merely saw a person in her, she blossomed. And together they proved that the strongest weapon isn't fear, but kindness, and the resolve to stand by someone when others turn away. Because even in a desert, a garden can grow, if there's someone unafraid to water it first.